45 million Americans were injected within a matter of weeks. It was the fall of 1976, and the federal government had declared a national emergency. Authorities promised the campaign would save lives, that it was absolutely necessary, that there was no time to waste. Doctors appeared on television guaranteeing total safety. Politicians demanded immediate action. The population was summoned to vaccination centers scattered across the country. Schools, hospitals, sports arenas transformed into administration hubs. Lines formed daily. Millions obeyed, believed, trusted. But then, something happened. The campaign was abruptly halted in December. Hundreds of people had developed a severe neurological condition called Guillain-Barré syndrome. Some were permanently paralyzed. Some died. And the documents that would explain exactly what authorities knew and when they knew it were kept sealed for decades. Why? What was written in those internal reports that the public could not know? And more importantly, who made the decision to proceed even when the first warning signs were already evident? If you want to discover the complete truth about what happened in 1976, subscribe to the channel now, hit the bell icon, and leave your like, because what you're about to learn in the next revelations will completely change your perspective on how public health decisions are really made. The information I'm about to present comes directly from declassified government documents, congressional investigations, and testimonies from officials who were directly involved. Everything is documented. Everything can be verified. And when you finish watching, you yourself can search for these sources and confirm every detail. Let's start at the beginning. In February 1976, a 19-year-old soldier named David Lewis died at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Autopsy revealed he had contracted influenza. Laboratory analyses showed something concerning. The virus was of the H1N1 type, similar to the virus from the 1918 pandemic that killed millions. Public health officials went on maximum alert. Memos circulated rapidly between the CDC, the Department of Health, and the White House. The concern was legitimate. If that virus began spreading through the general population, the consequences could be catastrophic. But here's where the story becomes interesting. What happened next wasn't just a medical response. It was a political decision. And that distinction matters, because when politics enters medicine, priorities change. Questions that should be asked stop being asked. Precautions that should be taken are ignored. Speed becomes more important than safety, and people pay the price. Within weeks of Private Lewis's death, top health officials were meeting with President Gerald Ford. The election was approaching. Ford was trailing in the polls against Jimmy Carter. His administration needed something to demonstrate leadership, decisiveness, competence. And what better opportunity than saving the nation from a potential pandemic? On March 24, Ford appeared on national television and announced the largest vaccination campaign in American history. He stood before cameras and declared that every American would be vaccinated against swine flu before winter arrived. Every single person. 220 million doses, the largest mobilization of medical resources ever attempted. It was bold, it was unprecedented, and it was rushed. But did you know that months before the campaign began, scientists had already warned about potential risks? Did you know that internal memos showed concerns about the speed of the program? So why did authorities continue? Was it really about protecting the population, or were there other political pressures at play? And when the first cases of paralysis began to emerge, why did it take so long to pause the campaign? Subscribe now and activate notifications because the answers to these questions reveal a pattern that repeats itself again and again throughout history. And understanding this pattern is essential to protecting yourself and your family in the future. The pharmaceutical companies that were contracted to produce the vaccine initially refused. They told the government, "We cannot accept liability for a product being developed this quickly. Normal testing protocols take years. You're asking us to do it in months. If something goes wrong, we'll be destroyed by lawsuits." So what did the government do? Congress passed special legislation granting the manufacturers complete immunity from liability. If anyone was injured by the vaccine, they couldn't sue the companies, they could only sue the federal government. And the government calculated that the political benefits of appearing decisive outweighed the financial risks of potential injury claims. Think about that. The companies that made the product refused to stand behind it. They demanded protection from consequences, and the government gave it to them. What does that tell you about their confidence in the safety of what they were about to inject into 45 million people? Production began in spring. By summer, doses were being manufactured in the millions. Quality control was accelerated. Normal safety protocols were compressed. Field trials were limited. But the campaign had momentum. Media coverage was constant. Public service announcements flooded television and radio. Celebrities endorsed the program. The message was uniform. This vaccine is safe. This vaccine is necessary. Get vaccinated.
And millions responded. By October, the mass vaccination program was in full swing. Thousands of clinics operated across the nation. People waited in long lines, arms were extended, needles went in, doses were administered, millions every week. The numbers climbed steadily, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million. Authorities celebrated each milestone. They appeared in press conferences announcing the success of the program. They praised American cooperation and civic responsibility. Then, the reports started coming in. In early October, doctors in Pittsburgh began noticing something strange. Patients who had been vaccinated weeks earlier were showing up in emergency rooms with unusual symptoms. Weakness in the legs, tingling sensations, difficulty walking. Within days, similar reports emerged from Minnesota, then Pennsylvania, then other states. The symptoms were consistent: progressive paralysis starting in the lower extremities and moving upward. Some patients couldn't walk, some couldn't move their arms, some couldn't breathe on their own and required mechanical ventilation. Neurologists recognized the condition: Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare autoimmune disorder where the body's immune system attacks its own peripheral nerves. It was known to occur occasionally after certain infections. But what doctors were seeing was different. The rate was much higher than normal, and all the patients had one thing in common: they had recently received the swine flu vaccine. The reports reached CDC headquarters. Epidemiologists began analyzing the data. They created charts tracking vaccination dates and symptom onset. The correlation was clear. There was a statistically significant increase in Guillain-Barré syndrome among vaccinated individuals compared to the general population. The risk was small in absolute terms, roughly 1 case per 100,000 doses,
But when you're vaccinating tens of millions of people, small percentages translate into hundreds of casualties. By November, the evidence was undeniable. The vaccine was causing paralysis in some recipients. Yet, the campaign continued. Why? Who was making these decisions? And based on what criteria did they conclude that the benefits still outweighed the risks? Declassified documents released decades later revealed that there were intense debates within the government. Some officials wanted to pause immediately. Others argued that stopping would create public panic and destroy confidence in public health institutions. So the question becomes, what was more important to them, the safety of citizens or the reputation of institutions? And you, what do you think? Do authorities have the right to continue a program when evidence of harm begins appearing just to avoid admitting a mistake? Leave your answer in the comments, because this is not just a historical question. This same dilemma repeats itself constantly in policy decisions that affect your life today. When the campaign was finally suspended in mid-December, more than 500 people had developed Guillain-Barré syndrome as a result of the vaccine. 25 died from complications. Thousands more suffered temporary paralysis and required months of physical therapy. Millions of dollars in compensation claims were filed against the government. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Investigations were launched. Officials were called to testify. And the documents that would explain exactly what happened, when authorities knew about the risks, who made the decisions to continue, what internal communications revealed about their thinking, all of these critical records were classified and sealed from public access for decades. Why were those documents sealed? What was written in those internal memos that couldn't be shared with the American people who had been injured? If authorities acted in good faith, if they made the best decisions possible with the information available at the time, if there was nothing to hide, why lock away the evidence? The official explanation was that releasing the documents would compromise national security and interfere with ongoing legal proceedings. But think about that explanation. How does knowing what health officials discussed in private meetings interfere with justice? Or is it possible that the real reason for sealing those documents was to protect officials from accountability? Is it possible that those memos revealed negligence, recklessness, or political motivations that would be embarrassing or even criminal if exposed? It wasn't until the late 1990s and early 2000s that researchers finally gained access to some of these sealed documents through Freedom of Information Act requests and declassification reviews. What they found was revealing. Internal memos from October 1976 showed that CDC officials were aware of the Guillain-Barré reports and were seriously concerned. One memo stated that the association between the vaccine and paralysis was becoming difficult to dismiss. Another memo discussed the political implications of halting the program. Stopping now would be seen as an admission of failure and could damage public confidence in vaccination programs generally. So, the calculation wasn't purely medical, it was political. Officials weighed the health of individual citizens against the institutional reputation of public health agencies and decided that protecting the institution was more important.
Another set of documents revealed that some of the early safety studies were not as thorough as publicly claimed. Field trials involved smaller sample sizes than recommended. Follow-up periods were shortened to meet production deadlines. When scientists raised concerns about these abbreviated protocols, they were told that the urgency of the situation required flexibility. One researcher wrote in an internal report, "We are proceeding with insufficient data. We cannot be certain of safety profiles. We are essentially conducting the full safety study on the general population in real time." That scientist was overruled. His concerns were noted but not acted upon, and when injuries began appearing, his warnings were conveniently forgotten. Perhaps most damning were the communications between the White House and health agencies. Memos showed that political advisors were tracking public opinion polls and media coverage of the vaccination campaign. One advisor wrote, "The president needs a win before November. This campaign demonstrates leadership and competence. We cannot afford to stop now." Another memo discussed how to frame any potential problems. If injuries occur, we emphasize the greater good and the millions who were protected. These weren't medical professionals discussing patient welfare. These were political operatives managing a narrative. And the distinction matters because when political calculations override medical judgment, people get hurt. The documents also revealed disagreements among experts that were hidden from the public. Not all scientists agreed that mass vaccination was necessary. Some argued that the evidence of an impending pandemic was weak. Private Lewis was the only confirmed case of swine flu that resulted in death. There were a handful of other cases at Fort Dix, but they were mild and resolved without treatment. There was no community spread, no epidemic materializing. Some epidemiologists argued that the entire campaign was an overreaction based on worst-case speculation rather than actual evidence. One wrote, "We are vaccinating millions against a threat that may not exist, while exposing them to a real risk that definitely does exist." That perspective was never shared with the public. Instead, the message remained uniform. The threat is serious, the vaccine is safe, everyone must participate.
So what really happened in 1976? The evidence suggests that a legitimate but speculative concern about a potential pandemic was seized upon by a politically motivated administration to demonstrate leadership in an election year. Normal safety protocols were compressed or bypassed in the rush to appear decisive. Warning signs were ignored or downplayed because stopping the campaign would have been politically embarrassing. When injuries occurred, officials chose to protect institutional reputation rather than immediately halt the program and investigate. And when the full extent of the damage became clear, critical documents were sealed to prevent the public from knowing exactly how badly authorities had failed in their duty to protect citizens. But here's what's most important. This pattern didn't end in 1976. It repeats itself constantly. Every time there's a crisis, real or perceived, authorities face the same temptation to prioritize appearing competent over actually being careful, to value institutional reputation over individual safety, to classify and hide their mistakes rather than admit them and learn from them. And every time, ordinary people pay the price while officials remain protected and unaccountable. What can you do about it? First, understand that your skepticism is rational and justified. When authorities rush programs, compress safety testing, demand immunity from liability, and then seal the documents showing their decision-making process, your doubt is not conspiracy thinking, it's common sense. Second, demand transparency. Support legislation that requires faster declassification of government documents. Back researchers who use Freedom of Information Act requests to uncover hidden records. Vote for officials who commit to openness rather than secrecy. Third, remember that institutional interests are not the same as your interests. Agencies want to protect their reputations and their budgets. You want to protect your health and your family. Those goals sometimes align, but sometimes they conflict. And when they conflict, you need to be able to recognize it and act accordingly. The 1976 swine flu campaign is not ancient history. It's a case study in how power operates when accountability is absent. It's a lesson in what happens when political pressure overrides scientific caution. It's evidence that authorities will lie, hide documents, and injure your safety to protect themselves. And it's a reminder that the price of trusting blindly is paid in paralysis, injury, and death by people who believed what they were told and obeyed without question. So I'll ask you one final time, does any institution have the right to hide documents that reveal their mistakes? Do you believe that officials who rush programs, ignore warnings, and injure citizens should be protected from accountability? Or do you think that transparency, evidence, and the freedom to question authority are essential protections that you cannot afford to surrender? Share this video, subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and most importantly, never stop asking questions. Because the moment you stop questioning is the moment you become a statistic in someone else's political calculation. And that's exactly what they're counting on.